Good morning, class. Today we take up
Good morning, ma'am.
good morning. Today we take up a new lesson. Jodi's daddy is a garbage man in English literature. Okay, I want all of you to open this chapter. This is a lovely lesson. This is telling you about one of the students in a class whose father works as a garbage man, and because of that, she has to face a certain humiliation in the class, and that humiliation is from other children. But how the class teacher manages the situation, he tells the importance of the work Jodi's daddy do, and then the story moves on. So basically, we'll begin with the first picture. Which of these two streets would you like to avoid passing by? Give reasons for your answer. But obviously, we would like to avoid the second picture towards our right side if we are looking at the picture. So, do you think the work of the people who help keep our cities and towns clean should be appreciated and acknowledged? How do we do so? Tell the class. Obviously, the people who are working for us should be appreciated, and at the time of epidemic, this pandemic, we need to definitely appreciate. Why? Because had these workers not been on their toes, we would have faced immense problems in our lives. Now, keeping that into account, let's read the story of a little girl who's proud of her father. Funny, how you can always tell when somebody is laughing behind your back. So now the story begins with the notion that yes, there were some people who were laughing behind the back. So it's a question asked that it's really funny that you cannot make out that there are people who are laughing at your back. Jody hadn't really heard anything, maybe a whisper, but when she turned around, the girls in the back row of the class were looking at her, trying to hide smiles and giggles. She looked back at her teacher. Mr. Swales was talking about what people do all day. He also wanted to find out what his students wanted to be when they grew up. He called on Billy Mister first. So it was a class going on, a normal class, where the children at the back row were giggling, and as soon as Jody used to turn back, they used to be quiet, and as soon as she turned back again to face the teacher, they used to giggle and laugh behind her back. And the topic for that particular class was at that time the teacher was discussing what people do the whole day. So obviously he was talking about the occupation of the different people. And since the children in the class knew what Jody's father did, so most of them were giggling. And so first name whom Mr. Swales called out was Billy Mitter. My dad,
I wish you.
please switch off the mic. My daddy works in a bank, Billy Mitter said. I guess I want to work in a bank too. Now, most of the time, whatever profession our parents are in, we tend to get inclined towards that. And this is a very obvious and natural case because children have grown up seeing their parents and they would like to imitate and be like them. So, this was a very natural answer from Billy Mitter, who wanted to be like his father, like her father, and wanted to work in the bank. There's a lot of money in the bank. My parents have a grocery store, Emmy De Silva said. Papa's behind the counter and Mama keeps the cash register. But I want to be an airline pilot. Now, the other child, Emmy De Silva, she also gave an answer that her parents run a grocery store where they manage different work. And when she grows up, she wants to be an airline pilot. Jody liked it when Mrs. Wales asked them questions like this. He was about to call on Jody when the girls in the back row burst out laughing. Now, as the class teacher, Mr. Swales, was about to ask Jody the same question, there was a giggle in the class, there was a outburst of laughter in the class, and it was quite embarrassing. So Shirley Danes yelled, Jody's daddy is a garbage man. P.U. Everybody in the class laughed out loud. Everybody except Jody, that is. She felt her face turn bright red. She looked around the whole classroom. Everyone was laughing. Some kids were even holding their noses. So now, before the teacher could ask the question, just by looking at Jody, the children knew that next turn is Jody's. And actually, Jody always loved this interactive class. She was always a very ardent participant. She enjoyed when Mr. Swales asked questions, but this one was particularly embarrassing, and she could hear the laughter. And before the teacher could ask the question, he was just looking at Judy when there was another child who yelled up, who shouted aloud. That was Shirley Danes. And she gave the answer instead of Jody giving. And she said that her father is the garbage man. And there was a hush, there was a great laughter. The kids were laughing at it. And it was only Jody who was quiet. She was embarrassed and her face turned bright red. And there were certain kids who were holding their noses as if the dirt and the smell of that dirt could be smelt in the class. Judy looked at Mr. Swales. He was angry. He almost never raised his voice, but now he did. Now, seeing the atmosphere of the class, Mr. Swales was very disappointed and at the same time angry. Usually, he used to keep his calm. He was never shouting at the kids, but this time it was not so. Silence! I want everybody quiet this instant. So he shouted, just maintain silence, and I want everyone to be quiet. At that very moment, the laughter stopped immediately. Please switch off your mic. The sound of cars and people going by out on the street came through the windows. Now, since there was pin drop silence, the outside noises could be heard. From the window, he could hear the cars and the people moving around. You should be ashamed of yourself, Mr. Swales said. Being a garbage man, I mean a sanitation engineer, is a difficult and enormously useful job. We should all be grateful to Mr. Harris. Where would we be without him? Up to our ears in garbage. That's where. How would you like that? So now Mr. Swales took hold of the situation and he started explaining. You all are making faces, you all are annoying, you are laughing. And have you ever imagined that it's nothing? He's a garbage man, and then he corrects himself. He calls him a sanitation engineer. And he says that, have you ever imagined how important the work of Mr. Harris is? Because had he not been around, we all would have been uh, surrounded by garbage all around, and the place would have been dirty and filthy. You, somebody said. A few kids started laughing again. Now, somebody in the class again made a noise saying, oh, yak, what it is. Such a dirty job. And that made the class giggle again. It's not funny, Mr. Swales went on. Garbage is a serious matter. I think you all owe Jody an apology. And after that, you are all going to write Jody's father, Mr. Harris, a nice letter to tell him how much you appreciate what he does for all of us. In other words, keeping our city clean. So then Mr. Harris, oh sorry, Mr. Swales changed the topic totally. He said we all should be proud of what Mr. Harris is doing. And all of you, your giggles and laughters, you hold an apology. You should be apologizing to Jodie, not only to her, but also should be apologetic towards her father. And now he requested all the students that they are going to write a letter and telling him, writing a letter to Mr. Harris, the garbage man, or the sanitation engineer, which he called. Mr. Swales gave a new word. And he said that each one of you will be writing a letter thanking him for keeping the city clean. And they really appreciate the work he has done. Now, with this note here, hold a pencil or a pen in your hand and take up the first word. Now, since we have only informal letters, so take up the heading. Write a letter to your uncle, Mr. Harris. Come on. Write a letter to your uncle, Mr. Harris. Now, know it. Mr. Harris is his surname, okay? But since you are only familiar with Mr. Harris as a name, you will be writing Uncle Harris, okay? So, write a letter to Mr. Harris thanking him and telling him how much you appreciate what he does for all of you, comma, in keeping your city clean. Full stop. In brackets, write Uncle Harris is a garbage man. Uncle Harris is a garbage man. Brackets close. Now the word limit would be 120 to 150 words. Not less than 120, not more than 150. Okay, so we stop here
Ma'am,
for yes, child.
ma'am, can you please repeat the letter question again?
Child, I had been just orally saying it. If anybody else has written it, please would you like to tell it to the class? Anyone? Uruj, are you ready?
Uh, y- yes, ma'am.
Please do.
Write a letter to your uncle, Mr. Harris, thanking him and telling him how much you appreciate what he does, comma, and keeping the streets clean. Bracket open. Uncle Harris is a garbage man. Bracket close. Words 150, 120 to 150.
Thank you so much. So we stop here for today, and I would like each one of you to carry on this work. And in the next class,